Welcome, Dr. Jaishankar, to the Times Network India Economic Conclave. We're certainly meeting under strange circumstances, behind glass walls, but we hope to have an interaction that will permeate those walls and bring clarity and, of course, information. Dr. Jaishankar, how do you believe the COVID-19 pandemic has influenced international relations, especially in the context of India? And do you believe there has been a realignment of strategic considerations in the international system because of our diplomacy?
Well, first of all, let me say, Rahul, it's a great pleasure to be here. And I hope we both come back at a time when we see more people in front of us, which I'm sure will happen. I think you appropriately started with COVID. So look, I think COVID's really changed a lot of things. And people use the word change sometimes very lightly. From the viewpoint of my domain, first of all, I think everybody's sense of national security has changed. Today, we would think very naturally of health security as part of national security. I was meeting with some people from the Gulf. They actually said this has made them very conscious of food security because their food flows were interrupted, and India was one of the few countries which kept it going during that period. It's also raised big questions about global supply chains, how resilient, reliable those supply chains are. Questions about whether the world as a whole was over-dependent, over-reliant on a few producers. It's, in a sense, I would say, sharpened the globalization debate as well. It's had really multiple consequences. I think different countries are going to come out of it differently. There's a debate, which we used to have in India, this term strategic autonomy. Today, I hear those words used by the Europeans about being more strategically autonomous because of uncertainty. So it's really driven home the point that uncertainty is a very big factor. Now, you ask me, how has it changed things internationally? I think some of it is, what I'm saying, but some of it is also people have looked, whether they admit it or not, at comparative performances, how governments and regimes have responded to the COVID challenge. I think the fact that, we could, on the health front, respond. We set up 16,000 COVID centers. For a country which didn't make PPEs and masks and diagnostic kits, etc., we sort of created that capacity fairly quickly. More than that, I would say the fact that during this period, the government was able to feed 800 million people, get food across to them, rations across to them, and able to put money into the bank accounts of 400 million people. I mean, when you tell people about this, they're staggered by the numbers. But it's also a story which hasn't, in my view, got the attention that it should have in the media, our own media, global media. I mean, don't take it as a complaint. I'm just stating a fact. So I do think, to me it's interesting. You would have seen those polls too. How have leaders and governments come out of COVID? What were they before COVID? Where are they now? I would say almost across the world, governments have been challenged. There would be very, very few examples where a government or the leader of the government has come out stronger after the COVID. We are one of them. And so we must have done a few things right.
Well, it's very interesting that you talked about governments being challenged, because one of the apprehensions about the post-COVID world order is that governments will become more authoritarian because the space to perhaps crack down would increase. Would you believe that that's true of the subcontinent, particularly India?
No, no, not at all. I would say In fact, I mean, it's kind of interesting. When we did the lockdown, you had voices saying, why did you do the lockdown? When you lifted the lockdown, you had voices saying, why did you lift the lockdown? When you moved money into the bank accounts of 400 million people without going into other people's pockets, they should ask the question, how did it happen? It happened because we are today more digital, our governance is better. So, in fact, I mean, you raised it in the context of COVID, but there's a larger point, and the larger point is, somewhere, liberty and freedom is not about bad governance and letting things sort of go along on their own. So that's a very, it's a sort of, I don't want to say, I mean, all right, I can't find a better word. I'd say that's a very jholawala attitude to realities of life. I mean, look.
So the state, you're saying, needs to become a little more paternalistic in times such as these?
No, not paternalistic. I mean, again, that would make it sound as though we are overstepping our limits. I mean, look, the state has a responsibility. I mean, if the state didn't ensure people had money, state didn't ensure people had food, state didn't ensure, that they could go for treatment, who else is going to do it? I mean, these are the basic obligations of the state. So, I would actually say I say this with some thought, okay? I think the people of India have got it, okay? The people of India have got it that the state, the government, the people who have been vested with that responsibility today responded to COVID. And why I say that they've got it is you look at all the elections which have happened as the COVID kind of, the numbers came down. Then the elections tell you a story. So I think this was frankly, one of the many sort of false debates we are having that, somewhere the COVID would be used for crackdown, etc. I think the reality is completely different.
Well, I'll come a little later to what the likes of Freedom House and some other liberal democratic institutions have had to say. We'll come to that. But I really want to progress with you on India's emergence, really. And I think that's a point that no one can now contest. The MEA, till March 23, I think, put out a list to say that we have supplied COVID-19 vaccines to, I think, about 76 countries.
Yeah, we've added 2-3 more in the last few days.
Okay, yeah. So thereabouts.
Yeah.
Has vaccine diplomacy brought a perceptible change in how the world now views India?
Short answer, yes. Now, long answer. Look, why did we started our vaccination program at the end of January. And I think our first shipment, if my memory serves me right, went out to the Maldives maybe 4 days later, and the second to Bhutan the day after. Why did we do that? Okay. We did it because it is actually, honestly, the decent thing to do, the right thing to do. This is what actually any country which is not wholly self-centered, which understands that it's, you can't be secure and if your neighbor is in peril. It's both, I would say, it's the smart thing and the right thing to do. We also took the step to make sure, and this was a commitment that PM had made in September to the UN General Assembly, that vaccines would be made affordable and accessible. And we had that experience earlier with hydroxychloroquine, which was that the richer, more developed countries were buying them all. So at that stage, we balanced out the distribution and the shipments of it. And in fact, we provided medicines, I'm talking of the summer of 20, to 150 countries, and more than half, 82 of them were as grants. Okay. And when I look back on that, and I'll come to the vaccines, look, countries, you know, the countries in CARICOM, countries in Pacific Islands, countries in Africa, they were immensely grateful. In many cases, it was not that they didn't have the funds. They didn't have the wherewithal to access it, to buy it, to ship it, to get it, and to, you know, sort of keep the bigger guys at bay. So, with all those experiences, Prime Minister was very clear from day one, saying, look, you know, in a sense, we have a moral obligation. You know, we keep saying we have a solidarity with Global South, etc. This is a moment to sort of, in a sense, put your vaccine where your mouth is. I mean, we've done that. But I would say in an interesting way, because, you know, there's, the word nationalism is so overused. I mean, people are calling it vaccine nationalism. I would say it's vaccine self-centeredness, because a lot of people are focusing on their own needs, which is not, there's nothing wrong with that, but sometimes to the exclusion of others, you know. In our case, I would say what we have done with vaccines, I think is a message to the world. It's a message to the neighborhood. And it's very much in keeping with what we have done in the last 5 years. I mean, if you look at a lot of our humanitarian operations in, you know, Mozambique and Yemen and Nepal and so on, or you look at our stepped up Africa or Pacific Islands or CARICOM development programs, it is very much a I would say an international vision which we have. So I think in a fair world, people would recognize that and give you credit.
Well, the world is not always fair, and certainly not to your government from time to time. So there are a lot of people
sure, I don't always hold my breath.
Who've been saying, in fact, you know, we have a chief minister in Mamata Banerjee in Bengal. She said, look, the center isn't sending us enough shots, and, you know, we're busy inoculating the rest of the world. I mean, how do you respond to that? Because obviously, to any objective observer, this is a great humanitarian cause, and India has never shied away from its responsibility, and especially when today we're in the chair of the UNHRC, got to step up to the table. So your response to that?
Look, Rahul, I think we're in the middle of elections somewhere, so people say things in the election. I mean, even at best of times, what they say need to be looked at. At election time, the quality of accuracy is even lower. But put that aside. You know, when we looked at shipments outside, there is a committee, okay? The domestic, the pharma people, the health people, the foreign ministry, everybody is in it. We looked at our own demand projection, and we had a domestic plan. And in fact, Dr. Harshvardhan, my colleague, has spoken about it repeatedly in Parliament, which was first do the doctors and the health workers, then do the police and the frontline workers, then do the military, then do the over 60s and the and there will be certain margins which will be available, because this has a shelf life as well. So I think that was very much taken into account, because from day one, what is it we've been saying? Which is that we've always kept our domestic demand in mind. So it's a kind of an inventory calculation management issue. Now, in the coming weeks and months, as we now expand to the over 45s, starting with 1st of April, obviously there's going to be a demand spike, and obviously people are preparing for it. So in many cases, we have told our international partners that, guys, look, COVID rates are going up in India. We are expanding our own vaccination ambit. So we are sure you will understand that at this time, we have to purpose it much more focused at where we are. But
so the national interest is not going to suffer. That's what you're saying.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. Sure. We're speaking on a day when the Prime Minister is in Bangladesh, Doctor. And this is an association that we've valued quite a bit and nurtured over the last few years, specifically under Prime Minister Modi's Look East sort of focus. What have been the tangibles?
You know, in many cases, that's a kind of question I would ask. But in this particular relationship especially, don't underestimate the symbolism, okay? I'm not ducking the tangibles, I'm coming to that. I'll tell you why. Because, look, I was 16, almost 17 when these events took place. I mean, it had such a profound impact on this country. I mean, if somebody, I used to tell people in the foreign service saying, look, my generation, we are the Bangladesh generation. I mean, that was the defining event. Like for the previous generation, maybe they would have said, we are the partition generation, okay? Secondly, after all of that, you know, with the assassination of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, you saw, you know, what was a very strong relationship go in a very different direction. And so to me, number one, the Prime Minister's presence there, it's laden with so much meaning. It's very difficult to tell you. And I was in Dhaka just a few weeks before doing the groundwork for his visit. And, you know, I can tell you sort of, it's very emotional there, understandably. Secondly, it's very interesting. Today, Prime Minister has an article in a Bangladeshi newspaper called Daily Star, where he's asked the question, you know, what would have happened to the subcontinent if Sheikh Mujibur Rahman had not been assassinated? I think it is a thought which is very much worth thinking about. Where could we have been? Because he gives the answer, which is that, you know, a lot of things we are doing now because he and Sheikh Hasina are there, that much of those things could have happened earlier had Sheikh Mujibur Rahman not been assassinated. And also, I think somewhere all of us in India and certainly in Bangladesh and maybe in the subcontinent should not forget how that happened, who did it, you know, what were the forces at work, because you should not forget, especially when history has been damaging for us, it's not something we should erase from our mind. But today when you ask me what is the tangible change, see, it's not just that we have a great relationship, it's easy to say. We've settled our land boundary. That's a huge thing, because bear in mind, you know, your boundary, none of your other boundaries are actually finally and firmly settled. So it's something of enormous consequence. Secondly, the moment you take the negatives out of the relationship, and the land boundary agreement was a turning point in many ways, then the natural positives start asserting themselves. So what's happened in the last 5-6 years? You know, what they call the pre-65 connectivity, the railroads, the roads, etc., they're all being rebuilt. Inland waterway movement has started. We have an agreement that our people use Bangladeshi ports for shipment, which is good for Bangladesh, it's good for us. We actually have today power supply from parts of India to Bangladesh. We, fuel supply as well, we hope, from Numaligarh refinery very soon. So the economic, partnership grows, and this will have obviously a very, very sort of strong impact on Bangladesh. It will help us not just vis-a-vis our neighbor. I think it will be a game changer in the Northeast. It will certainly help Assam. It will help all the northeastern states. Today, I mean, even a state like Tripura is an immense beneficiary of better India-Bangladesh relations. So I actually am of the view that, what we speak about in terms of the Act East, actually to me, Act East starts at in a foreign context, Act East starts at Bangladesh. That if our relationship with Bangladesh continues to progress, Bay of Bengal as a as the beginnings of our connectivity eastwards would become much more salient. I think there are enormous possibilities there. And bear in mind one historical point. India has been a great country when Eastern India has been prosperous. Historically, you can make a correlation.
It's very interesting because you did say that if we continue to build on this relationship, quick digression, very quick response, because we have so many other questions to go to. Dr. Jaishankar, what could be a possible threat? Some people have been saying our domestic politics might actually overshadow the relationship.
No, I don't have that sense. I know. Look, some people here will tell you the sky will fall on you tomorrow morning. Okay, there are professional...
Jholawalas, Andolankaris,
there are...
Andolanjeevis.
So, but the fact is, the predictors of doom and gloom will do, I mean, that's their job, okay? I'm telling you the record is very different.
Let me take an example, CAA, for example. You know, I mean, it's been thrown up in this election.
Listen, please look, I mean, turn on your own Times Now TV channel, look at what's happening in Bangladesh, you'll get the answer.
Okay, now I want to ask you a question about Afghanistan. Did you ever envisage that we'd be holding talks with the Taliban? Is India apprehensive about the implications of the peace deal between United States and the Taliban, sir?
Look, I would put it to you this way. Afghanistan, you know, Afghanistan has been evolving. We have President Ghani now. We have President Karzai earlier. The nature of their dispensation is it's a very diversified form of governance in many ways. Rather than link it to a person or a force or a movement, I would put it to you from our perspective. We have a certain feeling for the Afghan people. We have a certain interest in Afghanistan. I mean, I would not deny that. We have a vision. I mean, we would like clearly to see a sovereign Afghanistan, a democratic Afghanistan, an inclusive Afghanistan, which is, which takes into account the interests of its minorities, which respects its women. I mean, so there is a worldview out there. So the question for us is, you know, if you know, we are to engage such a Afghanistan, you know, which Afghan forces inhabit the face, that is for them to decide. You know, it is not for me prima facie to say, I think this is good and that is bad. I mean, I would look at a space.
But the Taliban was problematic in its outlook, and it sort of goes against our own value systems.
Yeah, but Rahul, we have also been hearing, which we'll have to see. I mean, this will obviously be tested. That the Taliban, you know, there is something called the peace and reconciliation process. And everybody else is saying that the Taliban is reaching out and changing, etc. So let us wait and watch.
Okay, wait and watch. On Pakistan, our other neighbor, there are visible signs of a thaw, Dr. Jaishankar. We've just had...
If you say so.
Well, we've had a border agreement. We've gone back to a ceasefire agreement. We've had, after 2.5 years, resumption of Indus water talks. Is this a precursor, Dr. Jaishankar, to a full-fledged engagement? In your opinion, are we beginning to see that taking place?
Look, I think the agreements with the DGMOs, between the DGMOs, was a sensible agreement because I don't think Pakistan either did themselves or us good by encouraging or facilitating infiltrators and terrorists across the LOC and the IB. And a lot of the firing on the border was a direct derivative of that. So in a sense, if, you know, there is no infiltration, obviously it stands to reason that there would be no firing, because also there would be firing from their side because of the covering fire which you give. In terms of the Indus water, you know, again, we'd had talks, okay? We have always been open to the commissioners' meeting because you know, we are both parties to a treaty. We have building certain projects. They have certain views on it. We can argue about the merits of our case. So we've never hesitated from that. So I would, if you ask me, are these positive developments? Yes. So, you know, do I add them all up and make what? Right now, I don't have a good answer to your question. we've
But did it
always,
surprise you that they've suddenly, I mean, you know, the general there started speaking in conciliatory tones?
I am in the government. I'm supposed to know things. So, you know,
So
what
are
kind
you
of...
saying that there was some preparation that happened behind the scenes?
I think I mean, obviously people analyze, people discuss, people figure out
At
things.
what level was this discussion,
So,
sir?
I would say this to you, that we've always wanted normal neighborly relations with Pakistan. Everybody knows what that means. Huh? So if there are trends in that direction, of course, I would welcome it and strengthen it. But beyond that, I think it would be...
I think the joint statement really led to the speculation because it was worded in
Rahul,
such
you
a
can
fashion.
come at it 25 different ways. I would still give you the same answer, which is, you know,
Wait
I have
and
noted
watch.
everything
We're going to...
which you have said.
But
So
there is a degree of optimism, you would say, that it might translate into something a little more
I would say
substantial.
what I have said.
Okay, so let me ask you this. You're going to be holding a meeting on the sidelines of the Heart of Asia conference in Tajikistan. That's what news reports are saying. Is that meeting on with your Pakistani counterpart?
I am going for the Heart of Asia meeting, conference. My scheduling is still in progress. Now, so far, I don't think any such meeting. I think, as always, the press is sometimes so far ahead. I wonder what is driving them.
But do you have any opportunities there to perhaps, you know, talk, have a little bit of a conversation, pull aside?
No, look,
Would you be open to it?
Listen, I'm not going to sit here and discuss any of that with you. I'm going for a Heart of Asia conference. And by the way, my Pakistani counterpart and I were both at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization conference as well, which was some months ago in Moscow.
But you're open to a pull aside if it were to happen?
I think, Rahul, this is time for you to move on to your next question.
So I understand. I mean, it's never easy to second guess a testy neighbor like Pakistan, and I want to bring up another testy neighbor, China. Do you believe there has been any economic impact of the skepticism, Dr. Jaishankar, with which many see China? Or have the Chinese become virtually indispensable to the economic calculations of most countries to the point where China can't be ignored anymore? Yes, you can have your views on it, can't be ignored, you have to do business with it.
I would say, Rahul, that to be fair, the Chinese have a salience in the global economy. I don't think anybody can deny it. I think one needs to appreciate, what they have done in terms of their national capabilities in the last 40 odd years. And I would say strategically, in many ways, they have, starting with Nixon and Kissinger, I think they have out-thought the West, not just then, but over successive generations. And not just America, the West as a whole, which explains why they are where they are today. What will happen in the future? Difficult to say, because there are today a lot of contradictions and frictions out there. But when it comes to us, we need to ask ourselves, so we have this neighbor who's done spectacularly well. So do we just stand there with our hands in our pocket and marvel at what they've done? Or do we say, well, this is an inspiration, I need to also, strengthen my competitiveness and my capabilities and so on. When I look back, and this is not a political statement, it is a international relations or even a domestic governance observation, I think we did not think that way, we were about the same size of economy when Rajiv Gandhi went to China in 1988, and look at the difference today. So for me, I've always seen lessons in China's growth, in China's importance, salience, centrality, call it what you would. And I am very glad today to see a very purposeful government, of which I happen to be a part, actually address issues like infrastructure. You know, yesterday we passed in Parliament the day before the Development Bank legislation, address manufacturing, which we have done through the production-linked incentive scheme, address skilling, address education, address social indices. So if you don't do all of this, then, you know, life's just going to leave you behind. So to me, you know, in many ways, I mean, yes, China is a neighbor, and it is in many ways a challenging neighbor. But I think I would also urge Indians to see it as really, in a way, a country from whom our desire to be competitive and stronger with, you know, with deeper strength should be, you know, should inspire us.
I'm going to beg your indulgence for a couple of other questions. I know we're running short of time, and I just hope that the next panelist allows just 2 or 3 more questions. Dr. Jaishankar, you've called out, you know, the hypocrisy of the self-appointed custodians of the world, who find it very difficult to stomach that someday India is not looking for their approval. This is what you said recently. Now, you know, we've had, in the context of the farmers' protests, issues being raised in the British Parliament as far afield as that. We've had noises coming out of the odd senator, congressman in the United States. You had, of course, a hugely critical group of individuals in our country. Many in India feel that your reaction was overly defensive. What would you say to them?
Look, you know, people abroad and at home sometimes say unkind and unjustified things about us. Us as a country, us as a government. Now, there are 2 ways you can take it. You put up with it, or you call it out. The problem with putting up with it is they then get to define the narrative. So you can say, well, you know, I ignored you, but if they say it repetitively, you know, in the media, that it has its own impact. So I think calling it out is not defensive. I think calling it out is called for, it's sensible. So let me just make, because I'm also a little conscious of time, I need to run, two points here. One, you referred to the British Parliament, or I think you mentioned the US Congress as well. You know, our speaker made a point. We had the head of the IPU visiting us about 2 weeks, a week, 10 days ago. And our speaker made a point that it's not appropriate for democratic legislatures to pass comments on the working of other democratic legislatures. Okay. I think that's a very good point. So I hope, you know, what we think is a basic courtesy between legislatures should be observed. But if they are not, then I think people need to realize it's a 2-way street. That today, if the British Parliament has a debate on what they feel about Indian laws and happenings in India, it's very likely that Indian members of Parliament will feel equally strongly about what's happening in UK or US or wherever else, you know, and want to do something similar. Because as I said, courtesy is a 2-way street. The larger point, which is, you know, when I spoke about what was being said, look, you've got to understand 2-3 issues here. One, there are very, very comprehensive, very deep changes happening in this country. Okay? They are political, they are economic, they are social, they are cultural. Now, these changes, because, you know, and I mean, in a way, I would say, I would use the word revolution almost, but I would say it's democratic, so normally you don't use that. You won't say revolution,
Phrase, yeah.
but you understand what I mean. Now, that today is encountering borderless politics, okay? So you can have people here who are politically not doing well, as you can see, so the debate doesn't stay there. The debate tends to extend out. So I think a lot of the noise that you are hearing is borderless politics meeting.
So you're saying it's sponsored?
Democratic, no, I'm saying what I'm saying, okay? A democratic revolution or a democratic transformation at home. That's the first point. Second point, there is much stronger governance in this country, okay? You can, we spoke about 400 million bank accounts and 600 million people getting food. Now, why is that possible? Because you actually digitized India, your delivery system is different. So somehow in this country, there was a view that equating freedom and liberty with bad governance or non-governance. So when you start governing well, when you start using legitimate tools of governance and delivering on the ground, it's made out as though, oh my God, you are infringing on freedoms. Look, this is the heavy state doing more than it should. So this is a second issue. A third issue is there's also a tendency, not accidental, there's a desire or an intent or a program to project leadership as a kind of something overbearing, almost like a dictatorship. Now, this country needs leadership. I think if you ask most of the people of this country, do you want to be governed by grey, faceless, nameless people who are taking decisions or probably most likely not taking decisions? Or do you want, there are, for every country and every society, there's a crunch time. We saw it at COVID. Now, somebody had to take the call. Were you going to let COVID spiral out of control with all the consequences, or did you have the courage?
But what people complain about is the lack of consensus making and pushing legislation through Parliament
Listen, every one of the issues which we are going through has been debated not months, not weeks, not months, not years, in some cases decades. Look at the agriculture reforms. Was it a new issue? Was 370 a new issue? These are all, these are issues, many of them in some cases since I was in school and college. So, look, these are long pending issues in many cases, and of course there are more contemporary issues. It should not, it cannot be that the person governing doesn't have to take a decision because there are people outside who say, well, we have a different view. When you are elected, you have a responsibility to govern. When you have responsibility to govern, you have to have the ability to take decisions. So my view is that this country needs leadership. It has leadership. I think the people of India appreciate it. I would point to the electoral democratic validation of that view. And you will get noise from outside. So, as I said, you either put up with it or you call it out. I chose option B.
Well, I had a couple of more questions, but we've really maxed out on time. So do pardon me, Dr. Jaishankar, but you sent out a very, very important message to foreign parliaments, really, saying that, look, we might also debate all the issues that you're debating, sometimes in a censorious fashion on the floor of your parliament. So watch out. And this is a message that is being sent just before also Mr. Boris Johnson's visit. So that's a very interesting, it's a very, very interesting message to send out there. Thank you, Dr. Jaishankar. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, gentlemen.